By the way, before I get to the next segment, Andrei Telezhenko, that was a hell of an interview. That interview should be required watching. The narrative that the West has gone with is, well, Russia was just being an aggressor. Vladimir Putin wants to take all of Europe. And he always wanted to invade Ukraine. He was chomping at the bit to do this. Nothing can be further from the truth. And when you listen to him, what he is saying is some pretty mind-blowing stuff. CIA and whatnot were already in Ukraine. When the government was overthrown, they were already trying to figure out how could we put agent sleeper cells in Russia in order to destabilize the country. That's before the war. That is after they overthrew the government. So they were already gaming and scheming of how to provoke a conflict. Now, I said this before with the William Burns memo, "Niet means niet." Well, William Burns points out, if we continue to agitate in Ukraine about NATO membership, going back to the Bucharest summit in 2008, then this is going to create effectively conditions for a civil war that Russia would have to get involved in, whether it wants to or not. So William Burns understood, okay, this is not something Russia wanted to be involved in. They're not going to have a choice but to get involved in it. You are expanding NATO to the border of Russia at this point and building up a massive military on the border. This is going to be unacceptable. You're trying to do something very similar with Georgia and trying to create a second front. This is going to be considered unacceptable. And Russia will get involved, meaning you are provoking them and pulling them into a war. They knew it. And the thing I used to ask was, okay, did they sleepwalk into this? Was this a Hobbes choice? Talking about people correcting me. People do use Hobbes choice, and I know it's called Hobson choice, but people do use the term Hobbes choice. Is it that where either you let us put NATO on your border, a hostile military organization with a bunch of fascists heading that country, or you allow yourself to be surrounded, or you get involved? Which one is it? Do you want to get involved into military conflict, or do you want to let us expand to your border? By the way, this is the exact same situations that they're putting China in, right, with Taiwan. Either you let us pry Taiwan away from you in the way that we were able to pry Hong Kong away from you during the Opium Wars. And I noticed the Brits. Either you allow us to do that, where we salami slice the one China policy to the point where Taiwan is an independent country. We've effectively ripped it away from you and turned it into a military base of our own. Or you get militarily involved. Which one do you want? Both of those are bad choices. Both of those are impossible choices. And it's not impossible, obviously, because Russia just got involved. But I'm saying that if you're a country that is not looking for a war, and one country is agitating consistently that is either war or we're going to use a propaganda campaign to make it look as if you're the aggressor, or you let us put NATO on your border. What is your choice? There is no option between those things. There is no, there's no skating. There is no option in that. You either militarily get involved or you allow it to happen. Same thing with China. Either you militarily get involved or you allow them to take Taiwan. There is no intermediary. There's not a 0.5 somewhere in that. It's 1 or it's a 0. And so his point is, we understood, everybody understood, when the government was overthrown, that this was going to lead to war. We got it. They were putting cells in Russia to do exactly what they've been doing, either with those drones, even with those bombings, either with those attacks, that they had been planning that stuff going all the way back to 2014 and maybe even before 2014. That is what he said in this interview. He was there. He was there. So he's not speaking about this from, I read this in a book, he's speaking about this from personal experience. And even the Zelensky thing, where Zelensky gets in and he says, yeah, Zelensky actually did want peace. And somewhere along the way, he goes have a conversation and the Brits tell him, we'll give you all the money in the world. You're going to be able to beat the Russians. You're going to be in NATO. You're going to be in the European Union. You're going to, we're going to give you a pony. You're going to be able to fly with wings of gold to the moon. They tell him all of this stuff. He's an actor. He's not a political figure. And he sees somebody sits across him with a suit and they're telling him all of this stuff. And he's like, wow, you're the Brits. You're the Americans. You're the whatever. I believe you. And he goes down this pathway, flipping all of a sudden from the candidate that people elected, from a peace candidate, who didn't want war, to the guy who we see now, who's messianic, who believes as a religious rationale, like somebody believes in Jesus, that he is going to somehow prevail in the end, despite all evidence to the contrary. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. Now, Andre's point is that whether he was lied to or not is secondary to the point that he's gotten all of these people killed and continue to get all of these people killed and is effectively running a dictatorship where he has put political opposition in jail, murdered political opposition, or people just left the country because they were terrified for their life. And any notion of having political opposition media, any notion of having political opposition in general is off the table, going along the way with elections. Okay, if that is not a dictatorship, I don't know what is. And even if you could have elections where Klitschko is like, hey man, this feels like he's, doing this in order to cut political democracy in this country. Dude, you were part of the government that eliminated democracy in Ukraine when you guys overthrew Yanukovych government in 2014. So the idea that Klitschko is screaming about democracy is breathtaking. Absolutely, entirely, completely breathtaking. And yet they'll do it. He's not talking about democracy as an absolute. It's kind of like, the US said we're a free country. We're a free country for capitalists. We have a certain ideology and mindset that as long as you're fish in water, you don't really see the water. But the moment that you take issue with it, say, hey, I think you're taking advantage of these people, it's just corrupt government, then you see the water. The jig is up. I'm saying from the Klitschko point of view, yes, I'm okay with this Banderite government. But even in the context of the Banderite government, you are squashing political opposition. And political opposition being the band of lunatics and Nazis that we have at our disposal who make the decisions and who would constitute somebody who may actually be able to take power because we've effectively eliminated and marginalized Eastern Ukraine. It's an astonishing interview. That's all. I was curious about Zelensky's point of view and framing what was in his mind. And as he said, look, don't try to get into the mind of a cocaine head or a drug addict. Fair enough. But Zelensky has a certain tact about him where he makes these speeches and people are like, how is he saying that Europe must give him money? How is he saying that the US must give him money? That is very weird. You must give me weapons. You must give me money. You can't just leave. That's not fair that you just leave and abandon us in the war. That's the stuff that he says when he's on camera. And if you think so, okay, well, why is he saying that? Why does he feel entitled to money from Europe? Why does he feel entitled to money from the United States or weapons for money or from the United States? If indeed he was promised, we're going to give you all the money and the weapons, you're going to become a billionaire, you're going to be able to get a house in Florida or Paris or wherever else, you're going to get all of these things, your beautiful wife is going to get all the clothing and the money that she wants, you're going to be protected, you're going to be blah, 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 blah. If you were told those things, and fast forward to 3 years, where your country has been carved up, you've lost 700,000 people. Many of your people are broken and maimed or lame at this point for missing limbs and whatnot. Your cemeteries are overflooding. 20-30% of your country is gone. The Russians are sitting across from you saying, not just this, we want more. Meaning these are now part of the Russian Constitution and you need to leave from this territory. Some of that territory is the most expensive, the best areas of Ukraine, gone. And now Trump is like, we're leaving. Now, I don't believe he's doing that, but if you're Zelensky and you're saying all of this stuff was for naught, everything that you told me, none of it came to pass. And not just none of it came to pass. Not only did we not beat the Russians, we're losing people hand over fist. We're losing territory hand over fist. We have no capability of stopping that Russian onslaught. Whereas you told me that their military is going to collapse. They've built up 2 additional militaries full of equipment, and it's outpacing the amount of weapons you can provide 3-1. This is not what I was told. So you can imagine from that point of view, he's looking at it saying, you must give me money. You must give me weapons. You must give me these things. Whereas at this point, they're like, dude, we're politicians. We lied to you. You need to accept the fact that we lied. Now, Europe doesn't want it to stop because, for one, they want to keep feeding Ukrainians to the Russians with this idea of bleeding Russia. It has nothing to do with Ukraine, it has everything to do with bleeding the Russians. That was the entire premise of the war. That was the entire premise of getting Zelensky to provoke the conflict in the first place, all of which they knew was going to be a provocation. So when I used to ask the question, did they sleepwalk into this or did they do this knowingly? Decisively, they did it knowingly. That interview with Andre was fantastic. Fantastic interview. I want to get to something else. I've been deeply annoyed. I know I said it a lot, but it's true. At mainstream media that has just been accepting what Donald Trump has been saying on the issue of Ukraine. You get this, for example, this terse exchange with the White House press secretary, where truth comes to die.
On Russia.
Listen to this. These people are just propaganda speaking for the White House. And by the way, and make this point clearer, do you remember Count Smirkula, Matthew Miller, that disgusting troglodyte of a trash human being, if everyone existed? He was recently doing an interview where they pointed out, yeah, I think Gaza's a war crime. I think Israel's committed many war crimes. And they said, but you would never say that at the dispatch box. No, it's not my job to say it at the dispatch box. Basically, I am following the policy of my principal. And so my principal put me up there to lie. So I went up there and lied, even on something as disgusting as the murder and the burning alive of children. That was my job. So when you're listening to the press secretary, you must listen to her in that context. This is not about informing the public. It's about telling the public what the White House wants you to know. Those are very different things. Truth and reality is different from someone telling you what they want you to know. Keep that in mind. So this is press secretary for Donald Trump. Listen to what she says here when she's asked the question about, did the White House know about Operation Spider's Web?
More on Ukrainian drone attack on Russia. Was President Trump informed in advance by Ukraine that the attack is coming?
He was not.
And then she moves on. Next person. Next person. Few things. The question probably should have been, did the president know that this was taking place? Was the president involved in this taking place? Meaning, I don't need to be read into something if I'm already involved in the thing that's happening. There's that. So that could be an honest answer to the question. No, nobody informed the president that it was taking place because the president already knew it was taking place. He didn't have to be told in the sense of Ukraine telling the U.S. Also, we are supposed to believe that Ukraine was able to pull this off without U.S. intelligence. CNN was reporting that Hegseth was watching it. The U.S. knew. The White House knew. I don't believe for a moment that the White House didn't know. Also, we are supposed to believe that Donald Trump, who continuously said, if I can't get these sides together, that I'm going to walk. I'm going to say all of you are horrible people, and I'm just going to walk. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave Ukraine's devices. That's not a threat to Russia. That's a threat to Ukraine, right? Russia would prefer you to walk. That's what they want. They want to end the war. And the longer that you give money, support, logistics, intelligence, etc., the longer the war continues. You signed a mineral deal. This is your Lend-Lease agreement, where money is probably not going to be accumulated for 30 years. That's assuming that it's even accumulated then under the auspices or this idea that you're going to continuously give them weapons. You just couldn't justify to MAGA giving it away, so you came up with a scheme to make it look as if you're selling it. Okay, you're still giving them weapons. Whether you're selling to them, whether you're giving it to them, same difference from my point of view. And so with Donald Trump, who said he is going to walk, an enemy combatant, by the way, who's in this, paying money for it, intelligence for it. He's fighting the war. He's a belligerent. He's an enemy. Trump says, I'm going to walk. That threat is decisively aimed at Ukraine. Why was Donald Trump going to walk? If I can't get these two sides to make a deal, then I'm going to walk. Okay. So you walking is predicated on this idea that you can't reach a deal. Fair enough. You force Zelensky to go and have talks with Putin after Putin said, okay, let's have talks in Istanbul. And the day before the talks, they murder several people on a train in a terrorist attacks, multiple terrorist attacks on trains, by the way. And they directly hit nuclear triad of Russia, basically the nuclear deterrence. Okay. They go after Minsk Bridge, meaning they're doing all of the stuff around the same time of negotiations, the day before negotiations. Fair enough. You're Donald Trump. You're claiming that you're going to walk if you can't get a deal. And your proxy, the one that you give money, intelligence to, and everything else, has just done something that is radically provocative and that makes it clear to any rational human being they obviously don't want to deal if they're doing that. Okay, fair enough. What does the White House do? Where is Trump's tweeting? Where is Trump coming out making statements like, this is fucking outrageous. I can't believe they're doing that. I'm going to walk. They clearly don't want to deal. Silence is deafening. And I'm pointing out that the silence is deafening because the White House already knew. And that the entire point of this is a pressure campaign against Vladimir Putin. Where it's like, okay, Putin doesn't want to accept my deal. Well, this is the best that I can do as a US president because I'm somewhat of a weak leader. And so I gave him this nonsense deal that was totally ludicrous. I want to increase the pressure on the Russian government, but I also want to be seen as a deal maker, despite the fact that I'm a belligerent to the conflict. And so I'm going to have a shadow war under the actual war that I'm already waging. And in that shadow war, I'm going to pretend as if I don't have anything to do with it. Zelensky has gone rogue, despite the fact that the premise of me walking had everything to do with Zelensky not being willing to make a deal. Now, the catch becomes, do we honestly believe that a president who has premised his walking on Zelensky not being willing to make a deal or not being willing to engage, that Zelensky is going to risk the president walking when Europe and Kiev are desperate for Donald Trump to stay involved in this and getting rid of money, weapons, and everything else because they themselves can't carry that burden? Are we really to believe that Zelensky is so brazen, bold, and confident? The same confident Zelensky that went to the meeting despite the fact that he didn't want to go because Donald Trump told him to go or else. That same Zelensky has gained some level of superhuman confidence where he's willing to have these attacks just before negotiations without concern about the ire of Donald Trump walking away after he does these attacks. I'm saying Zelensky wasn't concerned because Zelensky knew that the fix was already in. The White House already knew. That's my point. That's a hell of a provocative move to make if you don't know what Trump is going to do after you do it. And if you're assuming that the White House doesn't know, if the White House gets pissed off at you because you did that and Trump walks, then you've damaged your capacity to wage war and you've effectively lost the war even faster than you're losing the war now. Under no circumstances do I believe for a moment that Zelensky would take that risk. Nor do I believe that the Europeans will push him to take that risk of Trump walking because of what they were doing. The only way he would do this is that the US, the Trump administration, the White House was already in on it and he fully understood he was insulated from Donald Trump walking after he did it. It's a pressure campaign. I'm not sure whether the US media all of a sudden, who calls Donald Trump a liar under pretty much every other context, at this point it's like Trump is clearly telling the truth. Does he have an incentive to lie? Yes. Would a habitual liar lie when he has a complete incentive to lie? Yes. It doesn't even make sense otherwise. That's a hell of a risk. If you don't know what your principal is going to do, it's not a risk at all. If you do know what your principal is going to do because your principal is in on it. There's that. The other thing is this. This is Kellogg. Now, I want you to see this. And I want you to look at this in the context of Joe Biden. Israel, Joe Biden comes out, Israel's murdered 40, 50,000 people. Joe Biden is being pressured by it because it seems outlandish. And Joe Biden says, if Israel goes through Rafah, there'll be consequences. AOC comes out and says, Joe Biden is working tirelessly to deal with the issue of Israel and Gaza. Blinken sent to Israel 30 different times. I am a Jew, as he says when he goes to the Middle East. And yet I'm negotiating for some kind of deal with Israel. And then you find out after the administration that all of our thoughts were true. They weren't negotiating squat. Under no circumstances did Joe Biden push Israel to do anything. In fact, Israel went so far as to say, thank God Joe Biden was president. God was looking down on us in a favorable light with Joe Biden as being president, because Joe Biden didn't stop us from doing anything, didn't push us for anything. So for all of the proclamations that was coming out of the White House saying that Joe Biden is working tirelessly, Joe Biden is doing this, Joe Biden is doing that, all of it was lies. All of it was lies. Lies for political expedience. So when you see Kellogg come out and say this, my point to you is that you should look in the exact same light as Joe Biden talking about working tirelessly for a deal to end the war, Israel's murdering of civilians in Gaza.
And I'm telling you, the risk levels are going way up. I mean, what happened this weekend, people have to understand in the national security space, when you attack an opponent's part of their national survival system, which is their triad, the nuclear triad, that means your risk level goes up because you don't know what the other side's going to do. You're not sure. That, first of all, it was a very bold attack. And when you do that, it's very clear the risk levels will go up. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get to a position where the risk levels are going so high that this thing will expand. And that's where we don't want to be.
So you're right.
And so what we want to do is prevent risk levels from going up. And we can prevent those risk levels from going up if Vladimir Putin just accepts our ceasefire and all of this stops. That's the logic that they're running with. We need to put pressure on Putin to get him to do something he doesn't want to do, which accept a nonsense deal that Kellogg himself is putting out there. And so Kellogg comes out as a confidence man and says stuff like, yeah, NATO expansion was a problem. Okay, yeah, okay, okay, we knew that. We already knew that. You think just because you're saying it, that we somehow look favorably upon you? No, you're an enemy. We don't care if you say that. We already know that's true. And you get him saying, that was a bold attack by Ukraine, bold attack. And it's upping the ante. So we're trying to get to a point where that's no longer in the cards. And how can we do that, Kellogg? By going with my 20-point ridiculous nonsense plan. That's what we can do. If Putin just accepts our plan, all of this stops. We're not bombing the Kerch Bridge anymore. We can freeze the conflict. We can stop going after, facilities. We can stop the bombings. We can stop these operations against the triad. We can stop all that stuff. We can stop the escalation if Putin just accepts my deal. That is the logic that they're running with. Trump doesn't want to say it because Trump is trying to get a deal. And the moment that the White House acknowledges that it knew about this, all hell breaks loose. Two reasons. One, how do you try to get a deal when you're going after the nuclear assets? There's that. Two, the reason that those planes were out there, for one, was because of a deal between the United States and Russia that we will keep satellite imagery of our nuclear arsenal, meaning we need to keep satellite imagery of your planes and you'll keep satellite imagery of ours. So it was US intelligence that they were using in order to know where those planes were going to be, because the US keeps monitor of those planes all the time. I'll get my point. So the moment that you allow Ukraine to do that, and you acknowledge that you allowed Ukraine to do that, you've effectively said, we used a treaty obligation as a way of hitting the Russians, using Ukraine as a proxy to do it. Okay, that's a big deal. Under treaty obligations, we had to expose this information. And you use that treaty information to give your proxy a way of attacking us and hit us in a way that tried to damage, our air bases and our capability of delivering nuclear weapons, and even our ability to detect nuclear attacks. That's a big fucking deal. So, of course, the White House is going to lie about it, because the White House doesn't want to open the can of worms of, we leveraged information that we agreed with the Russians to expose in order to allow Ukraine to hit their planes. President can't say that. President doesn't want to say that. However, the president knows that Putin already knows it. The president knows that Putin knows that he knows it. And what the president is hoping is that Putin will somehow, back down, wither away, make a choice of, okay, I'll accept his nonsense deal now that he's attacked these assets. Dude, you do not know the quantity you're dealing with if that's what you think. You don't know the quantity you're dealing with. I want to bring in our guests. I guess I just want to make the point very clear. Trump knew, the White House knew. This is why the deafening silence, all logic points to them knowing. And for the media organizations or for social media analysts who are coming out effectively saying that Trump should call Putin, Trump should de-escalate, Trump should do this. I hate to tell you, stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Trump is already the same guy who I was just showing Kellogg, who was like, oh, that's a hell of an escalation. This is Yermak in Washington, because Yermak is coming for more weapons, sanctions, money, and all this other stuff. And here is Kellogg, who called it unfortunate what Ukraine was doing, hugging that same Yermak. Just great. Just